Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Live with Kevin, otherwise known as an episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. So glad you're here with me. First one of these lives in the new year, and so glad that you're here. If you're with us for the first time, or I guess regardless, if you're with us live, I'd like you to start by going into whatever social channel you're in the comments and say hello and tell us where you're from. We'll see that. It will help us, and I'd love for you to do that. And while you're here with us, I hope that you will imagine that you're joining my two guests and I for a cup of coffee around a table. And if you were doing that, if you had a question, of course, you would ask it. If you had a comment, you would share it. If you had an idea, you would offer it. So why not do that here, even if we're not all in physical proximity? If you do that, you may get your question specifically answered, adding value for you. It will probably make for a better conversation for us as well, and likely make a better podcast. I'll say more about the podcast. You can see it over my shoulder, the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, if you missed that. This will eventually be there, not for a while. So you get the advantage of being first to hear this content from these two really smart guys. But one more thing, since we're here live on the 8th of January, our team, we're looking for a new salesperson to join our team. So maybe you are a follower of ours and know a little bit about us. And if that'd be something of interest to you, well, then you should probably send us a note. And so I'm going to actually put in the comments here, I think where most of you will be able to see it, the link to a description of the job. We'd love to have you join us there. It's, I think, been put almost every place. So you can learn more about it there. I'm not going to say any more about it. I want to get on with the podcast now. So I'm going to do a countdown for Marissa, and then we're going to do the introduction, and we'll dive right in. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Here we go. We're going to start in 3, 2, 1. Even if we think we can or want to, in a turbulent and changing world, we can't achieve success alone. Most of us would agree with this, and yet all too often we don't collaborate or still try to take the lead and make things happen largely alone. Our guests today say the solution and the future is co-creation. I'm confident you'll be inspired by our conversation. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you're listening to this podcast in the future, you could join us live, because these are all created in a live stream event. And so if you wanted to know about how you could join us in the future, we do it on your favorite social media channel. And so you can get access to all that, find out when these are taking place and more by joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to do that. Today's episode is brought to you by our Remarkable Masterclasses. Pick from 13 important life and leadership skills to help you become more effective, productive, and confident while overcoming some of a leader's toughest challenges. You can learn more and sign up at remarkablemasterclass.com. Now I'm going to bring in our guests. And yes, it's guests today for those of you listening. And then I'm going to, after I have them join us, here they are, I'm going to introduce them and we're going to dive in. Our guests today are Chris Deaver and Ian Clawson. Chris is the co-founder of Brave Core and co-host of the Lead with a Question podcast. He has coached C-level executives and influenced Fortune 500s from the inside out. He's worked at both Apple and Disney, working with inspiring teams that shaped iProducts and Star Wars experiences. He's a regular contributor to Fast Company, has been featured in the Wall Street Journal and Entrepreneur. He earned his MBA and continues to be a guest lecturer at the Marriott School at BYU. Ian Clawson is the co-founder of Brave Core with Chris and the co-founder of that same podcast, Lead with a Question. He is a regular contributor to Fast Company as well, whose work has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Inc., USA Today, and more. He is also the co-founder of Story Circle, a development studio focused on co-creation, world building, and original storytelling, acting as a lead writer and story architect. He earned his degree at BYU Hawaii in International Cultural Studies, and where he developed a high interest in world philosophy and communication theory. Together, they have authored and co-created the book Brave Together, Lead by Design, Spark Creativity, and Shape the Future with the Power of Co-Creation. And after all of that, welcome, guys. Glad to have you.
Thanks for having us, Kevin.
It is my pleasure. So let's start with this. We have this in common, among other things. Actually, we have a lot in common. A number of the folks that talked about your book in the blurbs have been on the show, or I know. So we have a lot in common. But one thing we have in common is we're writers of books. And so there's always a journey to a book. And so it maybe as a way to sort of finalize a little bit more about yourselves, but also to talk a little bit about the book. What's the journey toward this book? One of you want to take a shot at that?
I'll let Ian, if you want to share.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. I never set out to write a nonfiction book. I lean more on the creative side of things, but I have a fascination for leadership and thought leader material. I enjoy those kind of books. And that's how Chris and I connected, was this overlap of creativity and timeless principles that we find in these books. So coming together, we didn't set out to, tell people what to do, but it was more of this openness of discovery. How can we find this next book that is an ecosystem of principles? Both Chris and I, we have history with Stephen Covey's work. We really enjoyed his material. We truly haven't seen any book since that has an ecosystem of principles. A lot of the books that are out now, publishers, they go the safe route, where it's like, just go on one theme only, do a deep dive. It could be all about productivity. And there's a lot of merit to those books. There's value to be found. But what we were looking for is, how could there be an ecosystem of principles for the day and age that we live in now? And that was kind of the forming nature of how we pursued this book and the material thereof.
So Chris, I'll address this one to you then, and you can of course change anything that Ian just said if you want to. But in reality, if that's what you're attempted to do, you used a very interesting word in the title, and that word is brave. So Chris, why brave?
Yeah, most of us we experience fear in some big or small way every day, conscious or subconscious, at work, at home, things that are unknowns or things that we are just worried about or stressed out about. And, we can stay in that space and just live in fear. And it's we hear, toxic bosses, we hear those stories about cultures that people don't love or they struggle in. And that's fear-based. And the way out is by being brave. And, it powers us to just have a different mindset. And as we are brave, we can, explore things together. We can, live ego-free, collaborate, and, build things that, none of us may have been able to have imagined before coming into a meeting together or having the kind of conversations that we can have together.
So the first word in the title is brave together. And the last word in the title is co-creation. So what do you mean? I mean, I think a lot of times we hear a word, like we all sort of know what you mean by co-creation, or we have an idea, but I don't know that until you read or dive into the book or listen to this show, will you really know what you two mean. So when you use that word intentionally, what are you meaning by it?
Right. So back to writing the book, right? If I set out to write this book by myself, it wouldn't have ended up the way it was at all. So it's great to have a co-author, but it's messy, right? Co-creation is messy. And so, but I think, like, for example, we had the intro of the book that was written, and in reviewing, the quality check of our book, we challenge each other to improve the intro the way it started out. And there's a little bit of heartburn at first, right? When someone challenges, because you put everything on the table. You're like, hey, it's great. And to many degrees, it is good work that we do individually. But if there's principles at the base, principles like respect, good communication, candor, radical candor, things like that, then there's an openness to co-creation. And I think the traditional sense of teamwork or collaboration, it's kind of assignment, it's project based. Like if you work with an employer, you don't necessarily choose the people that you have to work as a team with. Co-creation is more intentional, and it's being open to and even desiring to work with other people, right? So knowing that there's a sense of humility, knowing that you don't have all the answers and your skill set and gifts could take you so far. And that's what the power of co-creation really is.
Okay, so that sounds really good, right? I'm going to play the cynic here, which is not my best suit. But that sounds really good. And people might be listening saying, well, that's easy if two of us have decided to write a book together. But I'm in the workplace or I've got a team. How do I get co-creation to happen when there is a project, when there are tasks, when I may not have picked all the people on the team? So all of those things being true, expand on that a little bit more as it relates to what most people would see as their current workplace.
Yeah. A lot of times, we talk about flow, right? This state of, being where you're step outside of time, right? In art or in sports, whatever we love. And, that happens individually at times. It feels a little rare. But, how often does that happen at work or in conversations? And that's something we can amplify. That it's a kind of perpetual source of energy, like perpetual motion, that can power projects. It can power builds. It can power shaping products, new products, and different services that didn't exist before. That are truly kind of leading edge, or that are going to bring us into the future.
So one of the things that you do relatively early in the book is give us some examples of what co-creation can look like in one of the most common experiences we all have at work, which is meetings. So let's just get really, really practical for a second. Like I'm guessing, Chris, everyone listening to you and they're saying that all sounds awesome. I love that big picture thinking. I'm going to 5 meetings in the next 4 hours. So like what does co-creation look like? Give us a couple of specific examples of what that would look like in meetings.
Yeah. So you start with reimagining the meeting as a brave conversation, right? So it's an exchange, not just transactional, but transformative. And so you have a different way, a different outlook of being open, to changing your mind. And I think that's a kind of the groundwork. And as Ian said about the power of leading with questions, they do this at Pixar. So they'll plant a question, a week in advance, or at least before a meeting, and let people marinate on that question. And so it just emerges as something that they've, had some time to an intention to be thoughtful about and to, explore. So those are a couple of things you can start with.
Yeah, I always want to add to that point of leading with questions, and we may talk more about that principle in general in a second. But as it relates to meetings, I think that the idea of giving people something to think about ahead of time is incredibly valuable for a whole bunch of reasons. We don't have time to unpack all of them. But the thing I just want to say is it isn't leading with a question, it's leading with questions. And so I'm thinking about a meeting that I led last Friday that everyone on the team had the questions. There was like 5 of them several days before. The intention being that I didn't necessarily need the answers to any one of those questions specifically, but as a group, they set the framework for what we were going to talk about. And I think made it a far more productive sort of setting.
Awesome.
And you're nodding your head. You want to say
that? Yeah. I think it just automatically creates an invitation to others to add, creativity, to add ideas. Because many times meetings that we are part of, it's very agenda driven. Like the employers or a leader wants to control the outcomes. And so it's very top down, agenda driven, download session almost. People show up to meetings checked out at the start of it. They know what to expect. It's very predictable. So doing this with questions really opens things up to, oh, I can help shape this. And there's a sense of empowerment there.
So Ian, you said that you both have learned a lot from the work of Dr. Covey, and of course the 7 habits is what everyone thinks of. In this book, you guys have 6 principles, and the first one we've just been talking about, which is to lead with a question. What I appreciate about each of the 6 is that you talk about the idea, lead with a question or lead with questions, and then you say, well, this is about wisdom. And then each of the 6, there's a principle inside of the task or the behavior, if you will. Anything else? We've talked about this one as it relates to meetings, but anything else you guys want to add on this one before we move on? Either of you?
I think it's one.
Yeah.
When you look at, and we talk about this later in the book, but it's one of the components of what we call the building blocks of culture, right? So it's kind of like Legos. You want to build something, and you want to build something meaningful in a culture. Shared wisdom is a great place to start. There's others, deep empathy, being powered by principles as well. Yeah.
Okay. So the next of the principles, and we don't have time to go in all that deeply on any of them, obviously, everybody. So we are talking to Chris Deaver and Ian Clawson, the authors of the new book, Brave Together. If you're watching, you can see it in front of my face. Brave Together, lead by design, spark creativity, shape the future with the power of co-creation. 6 principles. I just want to sort of highlight a couple more of them and let you guys sort of talk about them as you wish. So the second one, though, has an interesting description to me, which is turn pain into power. Like, that doesn't sound really fun to me. Most of us don't love that idea of pain. And you're saying, no, we need to turn that into something powerful. What do you mean by that?
Right. Well, it follows up nicely with lead with a question, right? So if you were to look in the mirror as a leader and you have struggles with your team or at work or outcomes and results, first thing you're going to do is you're going to lead with a question. You're going to ask yourself, what can I do differently? Right. And so this next principle is actually taking those steps with intention of starting to show up differently. Right. And so that could be scary. A lot of times we think we need to do more. So this principle challenges us to maybe consider shaving things down a bit, maybe giving up some negative attributes or habits that, are no longer serving our future, and get real about that. And so that's one way you could turn pain into power, is just switching your thinking, or flipping the script rather. Instead of focusing on the losses, which is just suffering and pain, focusing on the gains. What can you do today? Just baby steps to start to pivot towards that future.
And if this one is about passion, the next one is about compassion, which you guys describe as, which I love, by the way, making others the mission. Make others the mission. So, Chris, what do you guys mean by this? How does this one play out for us as a leader?
Yeah, this one's big for. Well, give an example. Satya Nadella at Microsoft, which they're just on the nipping at the tails of Apple right now for the most valuable company in the world. And it wasn't long ago that Steve Ballmer was kind of running the company into the ground, let's say, culturally, while he was sweating on the stage. But he had a fair amount of success, but there was a lot of execution orientation, stack ranking, and you just had a culture of what was it wasn't optimized. It wasn't as great as it could be. And so Satya takes over. But what's the real difference? It's deep empathy. And how did he develop that empathy? He and his wife had a son named Zane who had cerebral palsy. And so he spent a lot of time, taking care of his son, and learned from the example of his wife, as to, make that kind of hero sacrifice and just spend that time and really be present. And that deep empathy, has led him to bring that to the culture of Microsoft, and people feel it, and you feel it in the products. They don't feel as clinical, it feels much more kind of intuitive, and He's made some great decisions, but he's probably also doing a lot of brain trusting and listening and connecting with his, kind of key constituencies. Just a few examples, OpenAI, some brilliant moves that they've made. So it's good stuff.
All right. So the next two principles are about action and purpose. And I'm curious why you put the action one, define the situation, ahead of the context one or purpose. So I'm just curious. I think those are two things we pretty much all can understand, right? But I'm also confident you had a reason or a rationale for listing action before purpose. Why?
So I think people's notion with purpose is they feel like they got to find their purpose. They're always searching externally, right? And we believe that, prior to really understanding and embracing your purpose, knowing it on a deep level, it's taking action. It's being brave, back to the theme of the book, and brave with others, taking action with others is where you're going to really learn more about your purpose. And I think people feel like they got to have it all written down, their why, and it's got to mean something for their actions to land. Really, we have a phrase that we use, experiment with experience, which just means just get your hands dirty. Just go and do the work. You want to write a book, don't just research and read tons of books for years. Start writing, and you're going to refine your practice. You're going to get sharper with your messaging. You're going to have clearer words. And that's how you really come to find your purpose. So I think that ordering matters to us.
I think that example, and obviously as an author as well, maybe it resonates for me more, but I've told hundreds of people this, right? That as you write, you find your voice. And
Yes.
So finding your voice is sort of like finding that purpose. So I love this idea.
Use your voice.
Right. I love this idea of don't wait to figure that out. Figure it out in the process, right? Experiment with experience. Yes. I love that a lot. So the last of the 6 principles is follow true north, and the principle being alignment. So talk to us about that one. I think this is, again, something that people know that alignment matters, but I don't think that we do it very well. So what would be some advice about how to create better alignment within our team and with our team to the rest of the organization?
Yeah. So as we've been setting context or building the story of, let's say, the future culture, right? What we want to have, right? That culture that we love, we can get better at working as a collective, right? As a team. And we see this kind of movement in rhythm in sports teams, when they play well together, and the difference between when they do or don't. And, prime example, Golden State Warriors right now, not so much. Sometimes Draymond Green, he's a little outlier here or there, but there have been times when they've been fully aligned and dialed in, and they're following their true north to, be successful as a team. And so there's examples like that in sport. And then, in the workplace, it's, seeing how we can, and there may be moments of disagree and commit. There may be rock tumbling debates. Best ideas win, but then you align around, and just stay focused on that North Star, throughout. And, another example is teams at Apple, they would always go back to, in times of wrestle or struggle or debate, hey, we're out to make the best product in this category, fill in the blank, right? Mm-hmm. So if it was the Beats Pro, that's what we're here for. So, hey, you have your ideas, I got mine. We disagree on this or that, but ultimately that's what we're after. And so if people can stay, focused on their main intention, there's power in that.
That's the word that I was just thinking of, was intention. In fact, I just was writing about creating organizational intention, and it requires alignment is a key piece of that very thing. So I'm curious about one other thing. One of you mentioned it at the start, and those of us who are listening to this podcast or watching us live have leader in our title or leader as a part of our role. And whether we want to acknowledge that or not, as humans and as leaders, there's ego involved in that. And when we talk about co-creating, so much of what we've talked about for the last 20 plus minutes has been about sort of the collective and not about the individual. And so what advice would you have about the role of ego in what we're talking about today?
Yeah, I think one quick thought on that is, in the year 2020, we just passed through 2023, so here we are, 24. Got to remember, we in Webster, the top word was in the dictionary was authenticity, and a lot of people use this word, and Brene Brown has popularized it. It's very talked about, and that's good. But one of the dangers or risks is we call it toxic authenticity, right? So if it's about propping up ourselves to, or just focusing on what we need over others, it's not going to have the effect or the power, the staying power, that we need for the future. And so, we think about it as true authenticity, and going back to the empathic, conversation we were having earlier, it's more tied to that. Yeah.
Anything you want to add to that, Ian?
Yeah, I think there's this self-made pressure that people, individuals, leaders even have to have all the answers, to be the rock star, right? And
to be the expert. You talk about that a lot in the book as well.
To be the expert, right? And I think those around us are disempowered if we are acting in that way. But you can go farther with the collective. And I think there's a learning curve for people that really start to understand that it's a journey, it's an individual journey for people to embrace that notion. And so part of a leader's, I guess, stewardship is to help others along that path. How can we help people, shift towards that collective leaning and be brave together?
Yeah, I think it's so true for so many of us that we got into the leader seat because we were expert, because we were really good at something, right? And so for us to be able to make that shift out of that, the ego is not a bad thing as long as we keep it in the right perspective. And in fact, if we have a really strong ego, we have the ability to really, I think, lead and be a part of co-creation. Before we go round the final turn into the final part of our conversation, if I said to each of you, what's one thing we didn't talk about that you wished I would have asked, what would that be? Chris, you first. Well, and if you don't have anything and I did a fine job, awesome. But seriously, what's one thing we didn't talk about that you kind of wish we would have?
One that we talk about as well is why do companies kill creativity? And just unlocking the power of creativity in this context of team and working together is a powerful thing. The Sir Ken Robinson question, right, was tied to schools, right? So TED, but we think about it in terms of business too, and work, and there's just so much focus on results and performance and kind of squeezing creativity out that voice, the true identity of people can get lost. And there's power in that. So we need to ensure that that's part of everything.
Ian.
I'd like to maybe dive a little bit further with the concept of leadership. I think there's a lot of people that may come across our articles or book, and they may say, I don't have a formal title as a leader. How does this apply to me? And that's a beautiful idea around this framework, is anyone can be a co-creator. It's a mindset. You could be a co-creator as an employee and make a difference in your team dynamics by shifting the way you practice and approach work co-creatively, right? And with this foundation of principles, I think is the key here.
So Ian, a question for, actually, Chris, you're going to get it too, but here you go, Ian. I'm shifting gears before we finish up. What do you do, Ian, for fun?
Wow. a lot of it is writing. I love creative work. And so, the nonfiction writing is a lot of fun too, because if you can get clarity around these concepts and there's different iterations, right? I really enjoy writing and helping others kind of see what you envision, you yourself as an author or writer. It's hard to pull off.
Chris, what about you?
I enjoy spending time with my kids, co-creating paintings, playing sports together, board games. All those things are really fun.
Apparently watching the Warriors, or maybe this season that's not quite as fun.
Not so much fun
better
these
years.
days.
So the only thing you knew I was going to ask, which I told you just before we went live, Chris, you can go first with this one. What are you reading these days?
I'm actually listening to, I was listening to our book.
That counts.
Yeah, our audio book is out, so it's interesting to hear our own voices, but it's actually, we have a narrator, and then Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. Yeah.
All right. And Ian?
I'm currently revisiting in 2023, and I'm carrying it over to 24, Malcolm Gladwell's books. And so the 10,000
Any one
hour
particular?
rules, the one that talks about the 10,000 hour rule. I'm really fascinated in revisiting that, because I've read other books like Range with David Epstein, which he kind of challenges that. So I'm contrasting, because I think Malcolm Gladwell is a great storyteller, and it really helps me with my writing. So I'm just revisiting these concepts.
I'm forgetting in this moment, and I don't want to look away as we're doing this live. But the researcher from Florida State, his research was underneath the 10,000 rule. His co-author was on this show, and I will put that in the show notes for everybody if you're listening. As long as we always do, we'll put in the show notes the other books that have been mentioned here, as well as, of course, Brave Together. So where do you want to point people so that they can learn more about you guys, your work, and this book, Brave Together?
Yeah, bravecore.co. So www.bravecore.co is the best way to connect with us. Get the book, get other free artifacts and resources. Connect with links and articles that we have. Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, before we go, everybody, and first of all, I want to thank both of you for being here. It was worth the wait to do this. I had the chance to read the book a while back, and we were able to put this together, and I'm excited that we were able to do that. So thank you both for being here. But I have a question that I'm going to ask all of you as viewers and listeners. It's the question I ask every single episode, which is, now what? Okay, so you heard all of this. What are you going to do with it? What action are you going to take? Maybe action is your answer. Maybe you're going to experiment with experience. Maybe you're going to take any of the other ideas that you heard today and say, I'm going to put that into action for myself or with my team. Maybe it's getting a copy of this book, but whatever it is, ideas are wonderful. Action, turn them into something far more powerful. So I hope that you will take some action on what you heard today. And again, guys, thanks both of you for being here. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Kevin.
And with that, I will let you all go, but we'll be back. So I hope you'll be back. If you're with us live, we'll be back tomorrow, but we'll be back next week, as always, with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. I hope you'll join me. I look forward to it then. Thanks.